Assembly of the hammer strut magazine catch is the reverse of disassembly. The magazine catch is placed back into the machinist vise. The hammer spring is clamped onto a pair of medical pliers. Once the spring is compressed, the slave pin or punch is placed into the hole in case the assembly capture goes wrong. Carefully start the hammer spring pin into the hole. Using the correct roll pin punch, drive the pin into place. Check that alignment is correct and that the strut is on correctly, not backwards. Back in one piece. Make sure and use the parts diagrams for both disassembly and assembly to make sure you have everything in place and are missing no pieces. The firing pin assembly only fits together one way. The firing pin has a flat on one side. The firing pin safety lock also has a flat side, which must match up with the flat on the firing pin to be assembled. Pin should still be in the slide, having not been driven fully from the slide during disassembly. Install the firing pin spring. Install the firing pin safety spring into the safety lock. Be sure the safety lock is inserted with the flat side positioned to allow the firing pin to be inserted. Install firing pin with the flat on the firing pin positioned so that it will slide past the safety lock. Hold down on the safety lock to fully insert the firing pin. Remove pressure off the safety lock and the firing pin will be held in place. Using the correct size roll pin punch, drive the firing pin roll pins into place. Test the function of the safety lock and the firing pin by pushing in on the safety lock. While the safety lock is pushed in, push on the firing pin. It should move forward until the firing pin protrudes through the breech. Let go of the safety lock and again try to push in on the firing pin. Firing pin should not move forward enough to penetrate the breech block. Make sure both inner and outer roll pins are centered in the hole. Extractor spring fits in the slide here, with the extractor over it in correct position. Pin should still be in the slide, having not been driven fully out during disassembly. Put in spring. Hold in on extractor so that the pin can be driven fully back into the slide. Use the correct pin punch and drive in the extractor pin. Always be sure that pins are below flush so they do not interfere with any other movement. Test that it functions correctly. Slide is now assembled. I think it is sometimes hard for people to visualize the interaction between working parts in a pistol, specifically between the hammer and the sear. A good way to see this interaction is to mount these two parts in the correct relationship between each other on the outside of the firearm. Here I have taken two of the pin gauges I use for slave pins, one for the hammer and one for the sear. The board is just for a white background so that the parts can be more easily viewed. The first position is the hammer full down with the face of the sear against the front of the hammer. The next position is the hammer-sear relationship in the full cocked location. Finally, the hammer-sear in the half-cock position. Studying the parts in this type of configuration is often very helpful in understanding how the pistol is designed to function. Install the sear assembly before the hammer. Correctly assemble sear, sear spring, and sear. Make sure the sear spring is incorrect and that the flat end of the spring is under the sear. Slide assembly into frame from the rear. Align assembly with the decocking lever hole. Push in the decocking lever. Back end of the decocking lever must be behind the sear. To do this, come in from the back of the frame and push against the sear to move it forward enough to fully set the decocking lever. Caveat: do not allow whatever tool you're using to push on the sear to slip at all and strike the face of the sear. Fully seat the decocking lever in the sear assembly. Then, without marring the frame, push end of the sear spring over the exterior of the frame. Install the decocking lever spring. The magazine catch pin is partially removed before install of the hammer assembly. I do this to make it much easier to install the safety lever / disconnector. Use correct size punch and drive magazine catch pin from right to left, just enough so the safety lever can rotate freely during install. Hold down decocking lever with a tie so that the sear is forward and will not interfere with hammer install. I secure the frame so as to free both hands for the installation of the hammer. Use correct size slave pin and push the pin through the right side of the frame. Then move back the slave pin so that the safety lever can be installed. Slowly remove slave pin left to right until it just keeps the safety lever in place. Install the hammer from above. The hammer needs to be installed in the cocked position. When the holes align, push the slave pin through the frame. Now both hammer and safety lever / disconnector are captured. Ensure that the safety lever is rotated to the correct position. Now install the hammer pin with the correct rounded end to the right side of the frame. This is accomplished by pushing through the hammer pin while removing the slave pin. A small piece of masking tape should be placed on the right side of the frame to ensure that the hammer pin does not just fall out of the frame. Using a punch, drive the magazine catch pin back into position. Always be sure that pins are installed so that none of the pin remains above the surface of the frame where they might hit any other pieces of the firearm. Remove the tie so the decocking lever returns to its normal position. Test function of the decocking lever while pushing forward on the hammer. Manipulate the decocking lever and ensure that the hammer drops to the half-cocked notch. Install trigger and trigger pin from the left side of the frame. Remove tape. Install trigger bar, ensuring that the rear of the bar interacts with the hammer pin correctly. Install trigger bar spring. Test for function. Ensure that the hammer decocks to the half cock position. Be sure that the hammer falls all the way forward when the trigger is pulled. Be sure that the hammer cocks all the way back to the full cock position. And make sure the hammer pin sticks out on the right side of the frame to accommodate the trigger bar and is flush on the left side to go under the grip. Before we reinstall the hammer strut magazine catch, there are some details that, once understood, will avoid mistakes during this reinstall. It is common to install the top of the hammer strut into the bottom of the hammer incorrectly. If you understand what the parts look like when they are correctly installed, you can more successfully complete the install first time. This image shows the 4 positions of the hammer and strut. Knowing the association of the hammer and strut in these 4 positions allows one to see whether the strut is installed correctly or not. The top of the hammer strut has 2 spots where the pin in the hammer might fit. The smaller of the 2 is the correct point of contact. Here is the roll pin at the bottom of the hammer. The smaller half circle fits against this pin. Now focus on the larger of the half circles on the strut. How much of this area can be seen in the different hammer positions will help determine if the strut is correctly placed. In the full cock position, you can tell the larger of the half circles is fully exposed, and knowing where the small half of the circle would be lets you know that the strut is correctly positioned. In the half cock position, less of the larger circle is visible. In the hammer rebound position, almost none of the large circle is visible. The rebound position is where the hammer rests if you manually drop the hammer against the slide, then you let go. The hammer rebounds slightly away from the slide. The full down hammer position is where the hammer is located when it strikes the firing pin on the slide. Firing around. Understanding what the parts look like through the side of the frame helps you know that you have the strut in the right position during install and subsequent tests of hammer positions. Check both the decocking lever and the trigger bar to ensure both are in place. Also watch the hammer pin as it easily shifts and can cause the trigger bar to malfunction when the grips are not in place. Cock the hammer. Even though we will be installing the strut assembly with the hammer in half cock, it is easier to see that the strut is in place on the hammer from the cocked position. Work the strut assembly in until you feel and see that the strut is connecting with the pin on the underside of the hammer correctly. I am moving the strut forward and back until I feel that the strut is on the hammer. Hold strut against the bottom of the hammer, then decock. Hold the magazine catch against a surface while holding the hammer spring against the frame and push down until the assembly catches in its notch. Test. Cock the hammer and see that decock functions correctly. Make sure that the lever, bar, or hammer spring have not come out of place. Pull the trigger while preventing the hammer from falling full force and ensure that the hammer goes into the fully down position. Check that hammer rebounds. First, put on the grip so that you no longer have to worry about the decocking lever, trigger bar, and hammer pin staying in place. Place slide catch into position. Carefully install slide catch spring. Assemble slide, spring, and frame. Test that it functions correctly. Take pistol to the range and test fire before protection carry.